Good evening, everyone. My name is Guillaume Guins. I'm the director of the Hispanic Society Museum and Library, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the final performance in the Hispanic Society Museum and Library's 2020-2021 concert series, a site-specific video concert of Apolo y Dafne, a dramatic opera, or zarzuela, by Spanish baroque composers Sebastián Durón and Juan de Navas. This performance by Sonnambula marks the culmination of a year of exploration into a rarely heard masterwork during a most unprecedented season. It has been our great honor to host the North American premiere of the zarzuela, for the concert was recorded live at the Hispanic Society in New York in the Soria Gallery on June 10th and 11th of this year. If you have any questions, don't worry. There will be a live Q&A session with the artist after the concert. And now, before I leave the floor to the artist, I would like to thank especially the members of the Friends group of the Hispanic Society for their continued support. I would also like to thank again Sonnambula, especially artistic director Elizabeth Winfield with us tonight, for putting this amazing performance together. This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council and New York State Council on the Arts. So please feel free to leave any questions or comments in the chat bar during the event. I trust you will enjoy the performance. I'm sorry you're a bit late, but que la hacen muy bien. And thank you, Elizabeth, again. The screen is all yours.
Thank you so much, Guillaume, and welcome to you all, our final performance of the 2020-2021 season. Muchas gracias, the Hispanic Society, friends, the unbelievable staff, especially Mencia Figuera, Katya Ozzy, and Guillaume Kintz, for your steadfast belief, really, in this project and for seeing it through from the very beginning. We're indebted to you and to your team. Well, here we are. We can hardly believe it. Our final project of this season, which is safe to say the most unprecedented season on record, but it's also one that has been filled with deep learning, collaboration, invention, and art. And we're very thankful to you for sticking with us. And the time is coming soon when we can indeed convene in person. So as Guillaume mentioned, on June 9th through 11th, just a few weeks ago, my colleagues and I gathered together at the Hispanic Society. It was the first time we had seen each other in person in over a year. We gathered safely in accordance with COVID protocol that Sonnambula and the Hispanic Society had agreed upon together. Everyone was vaccinated and we were all tested for COVID prior to convening. So we actually rehearsed and, as you'll soon see, recorded without masks. We rehearsed intensely over 2 days and we filmed over the following 2 days. And tonight we're going to stream the product of those 4 days, but it's also the product of over a year of planning. A site-specific video concert of Apolo and Dafne, as Guillaume mentioned, a dramatic opera or a zarzuela by the Spanish Baroque composers Sebastián Durón and Juan de Navas. This is a work that is not part of the performance canon in this country. The excerpts that you'll hear this evening are by Durón, and they're from the first jornada, or the first act of the work. And we've interspersed 2 instrumental works by contemporaries as a means of sort of lending consistency to the excerpts that we've chosen. The performance will last about 35 minutes. We decided not to include subtitles on the screen so that you could really focus on the Hispanic Society, on the music, and on the performers. But if you visit hispanicsociety.org or sonnambula.org, you can download tonight's program with all of the texts and the translations in front of you so that you can follow along at home. And as Guillaume mentioned, please stay on at the end of the performance following the final credits, because I'll be joined by members of the cast and the ensemble for a Q&A panel with you. So make sure you stay tuned via the same link at the end of the program. So we are in the pastoral countryside of Thessaly in Greece. Apollo, who's the patron of archery, has mocked Amor for using the bow and arrow. And Amor, in response, deviously prepares 2 arrows. One is gold and one is lead. He shoots Apollo with the golden arrow, which makes Apollo fall desperately in love with Daphne, a river nymph. And then he shoots Daphne with the lead arrow, which makes her detest Apollo in turn. Now, there's possibly a metaphoric reading of this dispute. Apollo and Amor are fighting over the loyalty of the citizens of Thessaly, and this might have been an allusion to the disputes between the Habsburgs and the Bourbons during the War of the Spanish Succession. The python, for example, is much more significant here than in the Ovid. The inhabitants of Thessaly, the shepherds, have asked Amor to kill the pythons that are ravaging them. Amor agrees to this, but he agrees on the condition that they send him their loyalty, that they worship him. Now, they had previously worshipped Apollo. When Apollo learns what has happened, he kills the python to demonstrate, what real archery is. And he continues to pursue Daphne despite her disdain for him. Eventually, Amor intervenes and helps Apollo to catch her. And later in the opera, she'll call to her father, and ultimately she turns into a laurel tree. At the end of the selection that we've chosen, Amor is in mourning because of what he has lost, this contest for the cult of Thessaly, this contest for worship. So thank you so much. Enjoy the program. We'll see you right back here after the show, and we hope you enjoy.
Sagrada los templos que polvo vengo, y pues de las manos de peligros dejo, no es razón que goce lo que no merezco. siesta, olvida el sol pasando hasta el Madrid. Que desea el golfo, sepulcro de cristal y azul viril. subire este horizonte me haga frondoso y efímero del monte. Dormida una niña se advierte y andamos de sueño, imagen
Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Congratulations to you all on such a beautiful show. And hello to the audience watching. We're delighted that you could join us tonight. I want to take a moment to introduce our cast and crew. First, the core of Sonnambula, Jude Ziliak, who can't be with us tonight. He's watching our little boy. Thomas Iliev on violin. Amy Dominguez, who often plays viola da gamba alongside me, but tonight as a cello player. Hi, Amy. James Kennerly, a keyboardist extraordinaire who also co-music directed this project and rehearsed the singers. And then we were joined by some wonderful guests, Krista Patton, specialist in Baroque harp, and our three wonderful singers, Briana Hunter, the marvelous Briana Hunter, who sadly can't be with us tonight. Hello, Briana, we love you. Camille Zamora, Dafne, a longtime friend and collaborator, and Nola Richardson as Apolo, and we're delighted to have worked with her for the first time in this project. We hope to collaborate much more, Nola, with you. We were also joined in absentia by Esteban Larota, who is a wonderful theorbo player and a dear friend of the ensemble, and sadly, due to COVID restrictions, couldn't get to the city from Canada, but has been advising us on this project since the beginning. So thank you to Esteban. And finally, we were lucky enough to be joined by Elena Aroz as stage director, who helped us navigate the space of the Hispanic Society, helped the singers become in touch with their character and really kept things going in the days of rehearsal. So I'd like to encourage everyone to ask questions in the chat bar. I'm seeing some messages in the chat. Thank you so much. We're happy to answer any questions that you have for us this evening, but I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about mounting this project in the space. So we used the Sorolla Gallery at the Hispanic Society, very bright, beautiful room that a number of you know very, very intimately, where we're faced with a rotunda of bright sunlit scenes from the end of the 19th, early 20th century. And so I hope that Elena can start us off by talking about how we used this space, how we worked in this space. We're faced with an opera that is essentially a mashup between human characters and deities. And how, Elena, did this space provide inspiration for the conceit of this production?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a great question. So I had, even before we're talking about the space, I had the great joy of being able to sit in on Esteban Larota's coachings with all of the singers. And that gave me such an immense insight into the opera. Being Latina, I don't necessarily know what it means to the culture of Spain, and I definitely didn't know much about it in this time period, except from the theater perspective, which is very different than the zarzuela perspective. And his talking about these characters and about styles of even posturing, and I don't mean physical posturing, but styles of showing status and the ways that gender is shown through status. You could see all of those aspects within the Sorolla paintings. And so much of rehearsal, we would talk about a character, we would talk about a quality, we would talk about what is this character status in relationship to the other. And you could see in these amazing paintings, because Sorolla is so clearly known for his characters and the personality within those characters. So it was a real joy to have the paintings as dramaturgical backdrop and actually dramaturgical assistance. And then, you can see so clearly in those paintings status. And of course, what's so wonderful about, I think, zarzuelas, Spanish zarzuelas in this piece, is that in fact, it's usually the deities that have the lowest status in a relationship. It's the deities that we laugh at. In a lot of ways, the deities are the center of the comedy. They are the ones who are constantly fumbling over themselves to get the girl, but played most likely by a woman. And so there's so many layers upon layers of questioning of gender and feminism, even at that time period, I would imagine, and certainly today. And so to be in that space, that's such a celebration of Spain, I think just made us really pay attention to why this piece for this audience at this time, and what is it about this piece that's very Spanish when you look at it against other music and other zarzuela from around the world.
That's such an interesting point. I mean, so it's a collaborative work. There are two composers, Durón and Navas. And as I mentioned in our introductory remarks, the selections that we chose actually were all by Sebastián Durón. Now, when we in the future put on this complete production, we'll be able to hear the two composers juxtaposed to each other. Navas is very much of an earlier time period, very much of an earlier sound, and Durón is very much steeped in all of the Baroque trends and traditions. He's heard Italian Baroque opera, he's heard French Baroque opera. I wanted to ask James a little bit more about that in terms of the, as it were, Spanishness of this work. Could you talk, James, a little bit about how the work differs actually from some of its Italian contemporaries?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing with any piece that's sung is the language. And ultimately, it's that language, the colors of the language, the vowels, the consonants that give rise to the inspiration for the composer. So I think it's fair to say that this, certainly the part that we just heard then, was highly influenced by the Italian tradition that's epitomized by someone like Claudio Monteverdi. And it's quite possible that those operas were performed, or parts of them, or maybe the madrigals, were performed in the Spanish court. And so people got used to hearing that style of music, and it's characterized by the Italian language. It's very bright and forward. Those vowels, a, e, o, u, are right in your face. And the music has that sort of rhythmic vibrancy, and the motives, the musical motives, the melodies that come from that are intimately linked with that Italian language. So if we think about the differences between Spanish and Italian, the vowels are slightly darker, the consonants are a little bit more voluptuous, and especially you heard in our pronunciation the theta, that we were cristalla possibile, that we were going for, as a quote-unquote authentic pronunciation of the Spanish. But it's those characteristics of the language that give rise to the musical characteristics. So I think that aria that Camille sang so beautifully, the cristalla possibile, when she's trying to put herself to sleep and she just keeps getting woken up but can't. There's something about that language that gives rise to the musical phrase, which is da, 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 dee. You wouldn't really get that from an Italian composer writing for an Italian version of that music. And so it goes all the way into the very sort of, from the surface to the inside of the composer and of the music, how those gestures translate those tenets of the language. And I think also the rhythmic device, which is called a hemiola or a hemiola. And you will have heard that in just about every piece about 1,000 times. When you have a piece in 3 that goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and you're all happy and sort of dancing away. And then suddenly it goes yum, ba-bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. And in a way, it's this big sort of interruption of the rhythm, but it's also part of the rhythm because it's born out of that 3 rhythm, but it's a sort of a stretched out 3. And that occurs in Italian music, but it is especially characteristic of Spanish music of this time period. And it goes all the way back to the flamenco tradition and even further back to the canciones de palacio, those beautiful songs from the manuscript that Sonnambula has performed several times actually at the Hispanic Society. So that's a rhythmic device, that is very strongly associated with Spanish music. And you heard about 10,000 of those hemiolas in the performance that you just heard now. So I think those are some examples of how the music is innately Spanish.
That's wonderful, and actually, that's a perfect segue to asking Camille a little bit about her experience. In fact, singing zarzuela. Camille, you sing a lot of 19th century zarzuela, and the zarzuela as a form sort of reemerges around 1850 after sort of a century-long hiatus. So 50 or so years after the writing of this work that we just performed, it sort of falls into oblivion, only to be sort of re-invoked in the 19th century. What carries over to Durón, or I should say, what carries backward? What streams backward in your mind to the Durón from working on these later zarzuelas? Also,
absolutely. I love that question, and of course, I love this repertoire. I always say to everyone, there's just such a wealth, literally thousands upon thousands of zarzuelas from so many eras that are awaiting these kinds of treatments. But I do think that there is something just sort of innately Spanish, as James was just saying so beautifully, in the treatment of these incredible poems, for one thing, but also in this dance underpinning, in this rhythmic drive. And then, I do think that there's a it's funny, my guardian angel, my voice inspiration was always this wonderful Spanish soprano, Victoria de los Ángeles. And she is someone who brought to life so much of this music in her career. She collaborated with Tarragó and with other wonderful Spanish musicologists. And she is emblematic, I think, of the kind of actual voice that so is kind of ideal for this rep, which is to say, it's a voice with a really kind of a meaty warmth to it. There's an earthy quality to the vocal writing that is so innately Spanish, I do think. And I would also say that there's something that is a bit of a through line in these female characters. You hear it very much in the golden age zarzuelas of the 1860s, 70s, and 1880s, where you have these really strong female characters. And I do think in this early zarzuela, you hear the beginning of that. There's a strength to these characters that feels so, it just feels very Spanish. And I think, I just encourage everyone, there's so much more. It is just astonishing, just the wealth of rep out there in this vein.
It makes me want to actually ask Nola, who specializes in other music from this time period, Handel, Vivaldi, Bach. Nola, you're so beautifully situated in that repertoire. What stood out to you about the music, or let's say about the experience of singing this music, that was relative to these contemporaries that maybe you sing more often?
I think it was just so interesting for me to come at this era from, I guess, in a new language and a new kind of cultural take on the period of the Baroque, because although there's so much wonderful repertoire of the Spanish Baroque, I would say it's very underperformed here in the United States. And I think it's absolutely wonderful that this work we're kind of presenting and bringing to light here for the first time. And I guess I would kind of say, similarly to what James said, it's just in the way that the language is treated in the recitatives, you can clearly see the influence of the Italian Baroque style, but just the way the language flows and the word stress, it kind of necessitates a slightly different take on it. And it just has this wonderful, I guess, excitement, I think, in the, even the way that the poetry, everything, as Elena was saying, it kind of stacks up excitement through these long kind of crescendoing clauses in the sentences. So you really have to kind of find the way to draw the line of meaning through it, and I guess just bring all the excitement that's intended.
Right. That's actually something that I thought the videographers did so beautifully. Tatiana Dobek, Gonzalo Ruiz, who did our audiovisual, I think they really had that in mind as they let the pieces flow directly from one to the next. And even though we were excerpting it, I think they established a lot of continuity. We have a question from the comments. To all of you, thank you for this beautiful concert. This is from Jonathan Hogg. Hello, Jonathan. How did you discover this work, and would you place it, how would you place it in the context of early operatic works? Well, maybe I'll start by taking a shot at that. We've done quite a bit of zarzuela from the 17th century at this point. We've done a highlights program for the Hispanic Society, and Durón really stood out to us as a composer of great depth and complexity. And it so happens that there have been a number of his works published in modern edition in the last few years, but no recordings exist. And as far as we know, no performances exist. So we were able to use a modern edition published by Ars Hispanica for this project. Most of the manuscripts for Spanish zarzuela from the 17th century reside in Spain. But interestingly enough, we discovered during the performance that one of the works that we placed as a sort of interstitial piece, the jacaras that Krista Patton performed beautifully on the harp, is actually found in a manuscript that is owned by the Hispanic Society. So we have a direct connection here to our hosts. Krista, would you mind speaking briefly about this piece? What is a jacaras?
Well, the jacaras is it's a dance. It's like one of the many dances that were popular in Spain, and such the basis of so many compositions and variations as this jacaras was. The jacaras has kind of an interesting background in terms of how it appeared in theater. It was as many of the dances were. It could also be sung, and these composers have all had a treatment of the jacaras in one or another of their operas. Hidalgo wrote a very famous one. Juan Hidalgo, who's also a harpist, by the way, like Juan de Navas. Harp players were often organ players as well, and they were music masters in the musical industry of Spain. But the jacara was a song about that. Usually, sometimes it was a song in itself, but sometimes it was part of a small entertainment that included, that centered around the criminal life, the life of criminals, bad guys. Basically, it was in the theater. It was more of a sort of the bad guys and the good guys, and the robbers were all the subject of the jacaras. And so there's even, I think, the great Spanish scholar Louise Stein wrote about opera and semi-opera and, musical theater in Spain. She mentions one instance where about 4 guitar players get on a stage and turn their back to the audience and start to play a jacara. And people danced. And so it was kind of a show-stopping moment, and much bigger than just the little dance that I played.
Thank you so much. We'll send a follow-up email to our community about the piece, and we'll include some information about the manuscript at the Hispanic Society. To further answer Jonathan's question, how do we place it in the context of early operatic works? I think one thing we can say is that the fact that this work is scored for 7 sopranos and most likely not castrati due to the range is really extraordinary. And it's very different from a lot of other Baroque opera happening at the same time. And so that's a very special phenomenon, something that we're researching actively. Amy, you played the cello in this production, but you usually play viola da gamba with Sonnambula. Can you talk a little bit about the differences between these two instruments and why you were called upon to play cello for this production?
Well, when we look at the development of the violin family of instruments and the gamba family of instruments, where they coexisted peacefully for several centuries, and it's always the question that we get as viol players. Is that an ancestor of the cello? And it's like, no, they were from two separate families of instruments that existed at the same time period. They were just varied in popularity. But certainly at this point in time, the viol had drifted away from Italy and was incredibly popular in England and Northern Europe and Germany, and the violin as a bass instrument, the cello was, of course, as a member of the violin family, which had gained supremacy in Italy. Of course, the cello would have been the bass instrument of choice. And the gamba was used for special effects, for chordal accompaniment. But certainly in Spain, given the proximity both culturally and geographically with Italy, then the choice of playing cello as the basso in the continuo team was clear. But it was fun to play cello in this production and have the opportunity to, especially blending with the violins in a way that instruments of the same family would blend, and being careful not to be too overpowering, which is as when I'm playing gamba in continuo, it's a different. There are different problems to solve and things. So it was a nice change of pace.
It's such a luxury to have a big continuo band. So in this production, we had, as you saw, we had the harp, we had, of course, the harpsichord, and then we interchanged bass gamba with cello, depending on the flavor or the mood of the aria at hand. And hopefully when we do it again, Esteban can join us and add yet another layer to that. Esteban, could you talk a little bit about how the continuo group can be used to contribute to the drama of the work? How choosing the instrumentation can help navigate the storyline?
Well, yeah, definitely. First of all, this is not only that is for Spanish music, right? But it's good for all Baroque music. The continuo, first of all, maybe there are people that don't know what continuo is. The basso continuo is a line that is written and in where some indications on how to play the chords that go on top of a bass line should be performed. This line can be done melodically, as in the case of the cello or the gamba, or can be done harmonically. In that case, you would use instruments that are able to play more than one voice at a time, such as the harpsichord, the organ, the harp, and all the sorts of lutes that are around. So it's on us, like performers, we have to decide how to mix these instruments. But I think, first of all, the most important thing is what do we have around? We cannot use something that we don't have, right? So even if it sometimes could be anachronistic, or there is no proof of a particular painting of something happening for this particular work, if we have a couple of lutes and a harp and a harpsichord, that give us great possibilities on how to perform differently parts of the opera, because it's going to bring different parts alive. So it is on us and on how to try to decide how to use them. But plucked instruments, and in this case actually the harpsichord as such, are very percussive. So beside the harmonic function, we have the percussive function. Can be done in the harp, can be done in the harpsichord, but especially can be done in the Baroque guitar, which is a very rhythmic instrument, which can bring to life these rhythms that James was talking about, and that exist as well in the jacaras and in many of the Spanish pieces. So the Baroque guitar is a must for a Spanish production, I would say.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask Thomas a little bit about the on-site ensemble in the duet between Amor and Apollo, where you and Jude are, instead of together, Elena placed you on opposite sides of the room in order to mimic this kind of conversation that Apollo and Amor are having. Now, we've just been in a year of online collaborations and not playing together. So all of a sudden you're in the room, you're playing with your colleagues again. Usually that's a very difficult thing to do. You can't really hear each other across a room. What did that feel like after a year of not playing together? Was it more difficult? Was it less difficult?
Well, first of all, it was lovely to see it. I really enjoyed it in the video. I really thought it was amazing. Yeah, we did experiment with a few different versions of that. We experimented with, having me and Amor on the same side, and then Apollo and Jude on the other side. I was actually supposed to be the trumpet player, so I tried to play it as loud as possible, of course. But finally we settled on this, and it was, I think, visually and acoustically was probably the best possible solution. It felt really amazing to have, Briana's voice right behind me, and to be looking at Jude, and to be basically having this conversation. You can call it, it's a quarrel, maybe a fight, if you will. But it's quite exciting, and I think the excitement really shows in our final version that we taped.
There's another question from the chat. How can we promote the awareness and the production of this type of work in the US? That's a wonderful question. Someone want to take that? Well, first of all, thanks to the Hispanic Society for taking on this project. Real huge thanks to them. So that's one step. Also, because of the pandemic, we were forced to make a video. So now we have proof of its existence, and that can circulate widely. Elena, Camille, I'd love to hear from you about this. I feel like this might be in your wheelhouse a little bit.
Well, I definitely want to hear from Elena, who is one of the many gifts to this whole experience, but I will just chime in. What a beautiful question. Thank you so much for answering. And I would say, share this link far and wide, and just keep listening, keep delving, keep discovering. Again, there is just boundless repertoire. And I think right now it is so front of mind. What is canon? Who decides, who gets play, who gets airplay? And it's a wonderful moment to open up conversations to new voices. And yeah, so those are just some thoughts from me. And I'd love to hear Elena's perspective.
There are so many people in this country who speak Spanish as their first language. And not to say that there isn't incredible work coming from the Latin diaspora, but really, this is wonderful work that I think a lot of people would feel that they had access to because of the language. And I do think that when we think about the canon, we do need to think about messing with the language a bit. We think we need to shake things up. I think we can shake up audiences when we shake up our programming. And I also think what's so fantastic about these pieces is because they're so almost unknown in this country, that it's almost like doing new opera. I tend to do a lot of new opera, and the reason I love directing new opera is because I get to figure out the puzzle. There's nobody who's done it before for me to have to be in conversation with their production, make sure it's something new, or, okay, this is the 100th time this show is going to happen this season at some opera company. This is almost like doing something brand new. And to me, that's very exciting. There's so much to investigate in terms of the themes, to think about why 7 sopranos and what does that mean today? And which I think is a really exciting conversation, and why in this time period, these composers were writing female characters in a different way than many of their contemporaries in other countries. And so I hope more companies get on board, and if audiences ask, maybe they'll provide.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to all of you for joining us for the premiere, and just let's give ourselves a round of applause. We made an opera during a pandemic, so yay. Amazing work, all of you. And it really just goes to show what can happen with a collaboration. It was such an easy collaboration with you all, and I'm indebted to you all. So thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed it. Please spread the word, and we hope to see you next season, in a future season, with the full piece. So we wish you well and good health, and we will see you again. Good night.